First tonight, world leaders in Paris are entering critical negotiations on one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, climate change. It's hoped the first worldwide agreement on reducing greenhouse gases will be reached. Let's go live to Paris now, and our Europe correspondent Brett Mason joins me. Brett, the conference is just getting underway.
Well, Janice, a staggering 147 world leaders are just sitting down to begin debating climate change. It is, in fact, the biggest ever United Nations leaders event in history, and the Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon, started proceedings here in Paris this morning by asking members to stand in memory of all of those who lost their lives here during the recent Paris terror attacks. A very sombre start to proceedings as those 147 world leaders paused in memory. But despite the atrocities that have taken place here in the last fortnight, the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, gave a very emotional speech to delegates, saying it isn't terrorism but climate change that poses the greatest risk to humanity.
In damaging our climate, we become the architects of our own destruction. While the planet can survive the scorching of the earth and the rising of the waters, the human race cannot. The absurd thing is that we know exactly what needs to be done.
So lots of talk, but will there be action? We will know very soon as leaders sit down and try and agree to a new and universal approach to combating climate change.
On a windy, chilly Paris morning, it was down to business. Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull joining some 150 world leaders.
It is in the name of climate justice that I'm speaking before you today, and in the name of climate justice that we must act.
It's not the first hyped-up global climate summit, but instead of failures such as Copenhagen in 2009, with targets imposed and rejected by some countries, this time governments have laid out their own plans to cut CO2 emissions based on political and economic feasibility.
But we need to go much faster, much further, if we are to limit the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius.
Today, China and India were blanketed in hazardous choking smog. Beijing issues its highest level smog alert this year. These nations, two of the world's biggest emitters, talk merely of reducing carbon intensity rather than actual emissions. Fast-growing China has said it plans to keep boosting emissions for up to 15 more years, despite the activists.
Already, the Chinese people are really not happy about the appalling pollution situation in China now. That will perhaps create extra pressure.
And India says it plans to burn a lot more coal.
Don't you think that my people also have a right to grow and to use energy? Should they remain in dark? Is it humanity?
In a few hours, Malcolm Turnbull will set out Australia's plan of reducing emissions by 26 to 28% on 2005 levels by 2030. He faces pressure to consider an emissions trading scheme as he prepares to pledge a doubling of investment in clean energy technology, joining US President Barack Obama and other leaders in launching a 20-country plan known as Mission Innovation.
And all 147 leaders will address the conference here in Paris. These are live pictures from inside the auditorium behind me as the first world leaders take to the podium. There are high hopes for this climate summit because, unlike the failed Copenhagen talks, leaders have had to submit their pledges and targets before arriving here, so there won't be the types of all-night negotiations as we saw in Denmark. Australia's pledge of a 26 to 28% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030 has been widely criticised. Some say Australia not doing enough to contribute to the global effort. The opposition is calling for a pledge of a 45% reduction, which the Prime Minister has described as heroic but very, very expensive. Janice?
Brett Mason, thanks. That's Brett Mason joining us live from Paris.